I want to know how the hell people in Canada are even living. Like, I just got a good job. I start in September, but even with that job, it pays less than 40 grand a year.
Oh, Canada, land of maple syrup, hockey, and sky-high living costs? Today, we're about to uncover the spine-chilling secrets behind the jaw-dropping cost of living in Canada. Have you wondered why Canada's cost of living is sky-high? And what does it mean for you, your wallet, and your future? The cost of living in Canada has been skyrocketing, leaving many Canadians barely able to afford necessities like housing, food, and transportation. The average Canadian now spends over half their income on shelter alone, with housing prices in cities like Toronto and Vancouver rivaling New York and San Francisco. This is a horrifying truth that Canadians need to be aware of. While wages have stagnated over the past few decades, costs for things like groceries, cell phone bills, and childcare has shot up dramatically. Canada has some of the highest cell phone bills and childcare costs among OECD countries. The average family of 4 now spends almost $700 a week just on groceries and shelter. This is an incredible financial burden that lower and middle-class families are expected to bear. A troubling new trend has emerged on TikTok, desperate Canadians breaking down in tears about their inability to make ends meet, even with decent full-time jobs. I just got a good job. I started in September, but even with a job, it pays less than $40,000 a year, cried one woman. I can't buy anything. I can't afford the rent these days. With over 5 million views, her video has struck a chord, and the data backs up these anecdotes. A July survey found a shocking 52% of Canadians are now just $200 away from insolvency, an increase from 46% after just 3 months. This financial desperation is being driven by soaring household bills, rising food prices, and ballooning debt costs as interest rates have jumped over the past 18 months. Even worse, 35% of Canadians don't even make enough now to cover their current bills, the highest level ever recorded. Yet bizarrely, the government claims everything is just fine with the economy. With 5% wage growth outpaced inflation in July, just as it done in the past 6 months, and with unemployment at just 5.5%, near historic lows, our economic fundamentals remain strong, insisted Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland recently. But is this rosy view further away from the truth? Before wages were barely keeping up with inflation, now it's a reverse, with Canadians losing 8 to 10% in purchasing power since the pandemic began. And while a 5.5% unemployment rate may seem low, it's actually up from 4.9% this year, a rapid 0.6% rise that historically signals a recession is imminent. When the Liberals came to power in 2015, they promised to strengthen the middle class. Chrystia Freeland herself warned back then about downward pressure on middle-class wages from globalization and technology. Yet now the same government seems blind to these trends. Why? Because when they attained power, the Liberals inherited a political and economic system already in decline. Rather than fix it, they attempted to use it for political gain. But now that system is failing, and the ordinary Canadians are paying the price. Without constantly ballooning housing valuations, it seems Canada doesn't have much of an actual economy left. But it's not just households that are addicted to debt. Government deficits have also exploded under Justin Trudeau. After spending more and more on social programs for years, pandemic debt went into overdrive. Canada's total government debt has now doubled over the past 15 years, reaching a staggering $2.1 trillion. Are you all shocked by how expensive it is to live in Canada compared to other countries? Many economists warned that all this debt-fueled spending would have inflationary effects, but the government ploughed ahead anyway. Now with inflation spiking again after a brief summer respite, the Bank of Canada is aggressively hiking rates to get it under control. But higher interest rates are kryptonite for the government's debt binge. Interest costs are now soaring. Servicing all this debt is also becoming extremely expensive for households. Canadians are the most indebted of all G7 countries, owing $2.9 trillion total, nearly all mortgage debt. The average mortgage has nearly doubled in the past decade, the total value growing 50% in just the past 5 years. And now, with mortgage rates surging, monthly payments for households have spiked 30% in just 1 year. Those who bought houses as investments are jacking up rents to cover their own increased costs. On top of this, immigration levels have skyrocketed in recent years. Canada has gone from 250,000 immigrants annually to over 400,000 targeted by 2023. By 2025, the total is set to hit 550,000 new permanent residents each year. There are also hundreds of thousands of more international students and temporary workers arriving. For a country of 38 million, this flood of new residents equals population growth of 3% a year, among the highest rates in the developed world. But Canada seems incapable of properly absorbing this many newcomers. Home construction lags far behind what is needed. Food systems can't expand fast enough, and the economy isn't growing anywhere near quick enough to support this influx. While population has expanded by 3% this year, GDP has only grown by 0.5%, meaning per capita, GDP has actually dropped 2.5%, explaining why so many Canadians feel poorer. Excessive immigration is clearly worsening the cost crisis according to bank economists. No one won a Nobel Prize for observing that when you add a massive surge of immigration into a market with no supply, rents and house prices will push higher, points out one report. Airfares, recreation and transportation are also being pressured upwards by rapid growth, but the government remains in denial about the impact. Reducing immigration could provide some relief, so-called cutting back on debt-fueled spending, but the Liberals rely on the Socialist NDP for power, who will block any cuts. The Conservatives now hold a commanding poll lead, but they could fix these economic issues if elected. After years of debt-addicted decay, restoring broad prosperity may prove difficult, even with a change in government. At the root of Canada's affordability crisis is a severe lack of competition and options due to oligopolies. Just 5 banks control 90% of banking assets, and the big 3 telecom giants dominate the wireless and internet markets. Without meaningful competition, these powerful companies can charge astronomical fees and get away with poor customer service. Canada deserves affordable access to things like shelter, food, transportation and communications. If costs continue rising while wages stagnate, we risk pricing out huge segments of the population from reasonably comfortably living. It is a horrifying injustice that Canada has become so unaffordable for average citizens. The government must make affordability and cost of living a top priority. How could immigration policy be reformed to ease pressures without compromising human rights? There are no easy answers. But clearly Canada faces intertwined challenges that will require both fresh economic thinking and compassionate principled leadership. The video essay offers insights into how Canada arrived at this crossroads by tracing the roots of the current malaise. But constructing a more stable, just and prosperous future will be the work of generations. Why are Canadians the most indebted among G7 countries? How are everyday people impacted by the debt binge? Canadian mortgages have ballooned, doubling over 10 years, and now higher interest means payments have spiked 30% in just a year. Those who bought investment properties are jacking up rents to cover their own increased costs. Rapid immigration is also being blamed for inflation, the cost of living crisis, by boosting demand amid strained supply. What signs point to long-term economic deterioration in Canada? How did the country get addicted to debt? Rather than building its productivity capacity, Canada doubled down on debt to fuel growth. Massive amounts of credit flowed into speculative housing investments, leading housing prices to become disconnected from economic fundamentals. On paper, this appeared like GDP growth, but it was an illusionary form of expansion, producing little real value. Other signals abound. GDP per capita has dropped 2.5% in the past year, meeting the technical definition of a recession, as immigration-driven population growth outpaces anemic economic expansion. Business investment remains lackluster, starved of incentives. Public debt has ballooned out of control, reducing future policy flexibility, and housing-related industries now account for nearly 30% of GDP, evidencing an unhealthy economic imbalance. That was a wild ride through the enigmatic world of Canada's cost of living, wasn't it? So, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're as intrigued as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on our investigations.